Hello, everybody. We're just going to give it a couple of minutes to let folks join. And we'll get started just a few minutes after 2 o'clock here. Thanks for joining us. Thank you all for joining us. We do have some folks trickling in, but we have 2 skills labs for you today, right back to back. So I'm going to go ahead and jump in. My name is Ella. My pronouns are she and they, and I'm the program director for Montana Women Vote. And I have the pleasure of introducing today's speakers for our first skills lab. Just a couple housekeeping things first. The Women's Policy Leadership Institute is a program of Montana Women Vote. We are a statewide organization working to engage low-income, Indigenous women and families, LGBTQ folks, Two-Spirit and non-binary folks, Black, Indigenous, and other Montanans of color and their allies in the democratic process as informed voters, policy advocates, and community leaders. We're super grateful for our presenters today and that you're able to be here with us. And we hope the information presented will inform your efforts in your community. And we look forward to staying connected with you as we work together to advocate and advance state policy that works for low-income folks in Montana. And if you want to engage with us more, you can hop over to the Slack. We have some information from some of our staff about how to join the Slack if you need that. And we're building community and continuing conversation outside of the conference over in the Slack. So just a couple housekeeping things, as I mentioned. You'll be muted automatically, but you can unmute yourself by clicking on the microphone icon in the bottom left-hand corner. Or if you were on the phone today, you can unmute yourself by pressing *6. If you're accidentally unmuted, one of our hosts may mute you just in the interest of background noise and accessibility. But if you get muted by one of our hosts and you meant to be unmuted, we're sorry about that, and we'll work to rectify that. We encourage you to ask questions or talk with other participants using the chat feature. You can submit questions by typing them into the chat box at any time during the workshop, and we may review them at a later time or throw them out to our speakers if they feel pertinent in the moment. We'll review the questions and pass them on. And you'll have an option to turn on or off captions. You can do so now by choosing the CC button on the bottom of your Zoom screen. You can also adjust the size of your captions as well. And if you have questions or technical difficulties, you can put them in the chat or call our staff at 406-317-1505, and we'll be putting this number in the chat box. We will be recording today's session, and if you miss something, recordings will be provided on our website. And at the end, we'll ask that you'll complete a short evaluation, and we'll give you a link for that at the end of today's session. So now, before I turn it away to our illustrious speakers, I'm going to tell you just a little bit.
Ella, you muted somehow.
Oh my gosh, thank you. Did I mute in the middle of something important?
You just said we're going to talk about our speakers and then it went muted.
So yes. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Here we go. Technical difficulty one down and out of the way. So Shane Morjo was born and raised in Ronan, Montana, and graduated from the University of Montana Law School. As a legislator, Shane has spearheaded legislation to make healthcare more affordable, protect public lands, protect children and students, protect consumers, and invest in education in Montana. He played a leading role in passing Medicaid expansion in 2015, and as a legislator in 2019, he was a central figure in reauthorizing Medicaid expansion in combination with Montana Women Vote and many other advocates. He also passed some of the strongest protections for students and child abuse victims that Montana has ever seen, and passed Montana's first blockchain bill to provide accountability in the tech sector while protecting Montanans from investment fraud. I'll also say about Shane that he is one of the most fun people to get together with during the legislative session and chat about all the craziness that goes on. But it might be hard to schedule time with him because he has a very rigorous gym schedule that he sticks to, which I cannot imagine how that's ever possible. And Barbara Bassett was born in the wide open spaces of Montana. She works in her community to reduce substance abuse among youth and young adults. Barbara is an avid barrel racer and runner and has served as chair of her county's DUI task force, currently serves on a number of coalitions that helps fight substance abuse and bring community together. And she's the former representative for Montana House District 24 and one of the first urban Indigenous women elected to Montana's House of Representatives. And Barbara is a mainstay of the yearly event, Mansfield Metcalf, and is always there to step out onto the dance floor with you. So formal bios and a fun little tidbits from myself. And now I'll turn it over to Shane and Barbara to regale you all with their wisdom today. Thanks to you both.
Well, thank you. Thank you to Montana Women Vote for having us. Shane Morjo, he, him. I just want to say, this organization is wonderful. And yes, Ella, thank you for pointing out that it took a lot of partners in getting Medicaid expansion and some of the other important legislation passed and killed, especially the efforts on women's reproductive health in Montana that we've had to work so hard to fight off in past years. And of course, we're paying attention to the courts right now to see what happens with a lot of those really bad bills that made it out of the legislature last session. So today I'll let Barbara say whatever she would like to say, and then she's going to kick us off with this wonderful PowerPoint that she put together for us.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. And I'm really looking forward to presenting with Shane. I served with him in 2019, and we always have, he was pretty close to me on the floor, so we always had a really good time. If you ever need a laugh, he's pretty funny. So I'm really looking forward to this, just to know that this is, we have an hour, well, less, to tell you how to run for office. This is just an introduction. There's tons of resources out there. When this is over, please feel free to reach out to Shane or I, because this is just a down and dirty how to run for office. So thanks everyone for being here today. So Shane, if you want to go first, and then I will answer these after you.
Well,
you already did some of your stuff anyway, I guess.
Yeah, well, Shane Morjo, I grew up in Ronan. I live in Missoula. I've lived in Missoula for, I'm not even going to try and figure out how long, but I grew up just north of Missoula. Why did you decide to take this session? Well, I decided to take it because you all asked me. Are these questions for everybody or just me, Barb? Just giving you a hard time.
Oh yeah. Well, if anyone wants to talk, I know that you were asked to. So this is like this. I think this is like when we're in person, it's one of those things where you're like, hey, why did you take it? So is there anyone in here that wants to talk about why you decided to take this session, or what do you want from it? Or How about this? Because we're Zoom. So does anyone just use the little hand raising function if you want to run for office in the future? Got some peeps. That's good. Yeah, sorry, Shane, that was my bad.
Oh, no worries. I skimmed through this earlier, so I knew this was coming up. But yeah, I think any type of office, whether it's, legislature or city council, really anything.
Oh, good. So we do have some people that, they want to run for office in the future. And then how about if you use the chat, what are some of the fears or worries you have about running for office? Or if anyone can unmute, whatever you want to. Or how about this? While they're typing in the chat, Shane, what were some of the fears you had when you ran for office the very first time?
Yeah, I mean, I think oftentimes it's just uncertainty, not knowing where to start, right? It can be overwhelming. A lot of people don't know what the time commitment is, how you're going to take time away from work to go and run, time away from your family, if you have family. And so that can be very overwhelming. Yes, qualified enough is one of the things I hear a lot from folks. And I can assure you that you all are very qualified. And I learned that after working at the legislature and seeing some of the people that serve there. So if you haven't worked there, go over there and spend a couple of days at the legislature, have some of these very fine folks who work for this organization and some of the other partners that roam the hallways. And you'll learn very quickly that you're very qualified and your views are much needed in the legislature, actually. So that was some of my biggest fears, was just not knowing where to start, being overwhelmed with the process and actually kind of, being worried about whether or not I was going to have an opponent, especially in a place like Missoula, because Missoula obviously has a lot of individuals from the Democratic Party that run in the local elections. So, trying to figure out how to navigate the local politics in Missoula in order to, meet people and show people I was interested in and motivated to run.
Yeah, and I saw some of the other ones of the funding, and we're going to talk about some of those things, but also something that a lot of women especially feel is that they're not qualified enough. And I have to tell you, I thought the same I'm like, oh, but I'm not smart enough. I asked women to vote or to also run, and they're like, oh, but I'm not qualified or smart enough. As Shane said, you definitely are. If you've ever spent any time at the Capitol, I promise you that you are. And Danielle, yes, structural racism. Yes. I am enrolled member of the Chippewa Cree, and it can be really, really scary to be like, okay, who's going to come after me for certain things? And I have had stuff happen. But that's why I wanted to run in the first place. So is to get to show others that it can be done. So we should talk about a lot of these on here. Yeah. Putting yourself on social media. That was also one of my fears. It's like, oh gosh, what are they going to drag up? Like, I don't have anything, but you never know what people can come up with. So I do think we will address most of these. And if we don't, we'll have a question and answer at the end. And then also, again, feel free to reach out to us. All right. So Shane, I think we'll just kind of do this as where we kind of talk back and forth with each other. Why did you decide to run for office, Shane?
Well, I mean, it actually started with, I went over to work on Medicaid expansion when I was advocating for Salish Kootenai tribes, where I'm a member. And I went over to work on Medicaid expansion, some treaty rights issues, the water compact legislation. Those were really some of my main priorities, some educational funding issues. And honestly, when I was there, I just, I got to meet a lot of the legislators that were there. But what I learned very quickly is that the legislature is predominantly men. It's predominantly white men. And a lot of them are retired. come from backgrounds where I felt like they're very out of touch with the issues in the community where I come from, and my perspectives as a younger Montanan and a native Montanan. And I just felt those perspectives were very much lacking at the state legislature. And my approach has always been, it's the reason I went to law school in Montana. It's because I've always wanted to work here. I've always wanted to be here with people and influence them with accurate facts and understandings of both Native people, but also perspectives that they may be closed off to. And I try to do it in a way where I'm very patient and willing to listen and hear them, but also work through issues. So I felt that I had the ability to go there and be proactive and actually make some progress and change, right? But that's just my personality type. There's other people that go there because they want to force change in a different way. But I will say that, it was pretty clear in just a short time I was there that Montana was lacking a lot of perspectives from people across the state of Montana, a lot of perspectives from people who don't have the ability to, or don't feel comfortable in their lives where they're at, to step away from work or family or other obligations to put themselves out there to go run. And I think this is a really good event because I think you'll learn that there's a lot of support out there from folks to help you in this process, to make it a lot easier on you when you start working through the process. There's a lot of ways to get assistance and support, and setting up your platform, your materials, all of those sorts of things that you might feel overwhelmed about. So this is a good place to start, but I don't think if you're on this Zoom meeting today, you probably paid enough attention to some of the issues in Montana to know that there's obviously some much needed change in the state, and a lot of perspectives that are missing at the state legislature that we need to get there.
Oh, absolutely. So in 2008, when Obama ran, it really inspired me to want to run for office one day. And I didn't really know how that would look. And then in 2016, I was approached to run just because of all the work I've done in the in my hometown of Great Falls surrounding substance abuse. And it just wasn't ready for me. And then in 2018, it kind of seemed like all the stars aligned. My representative was terming out, and things just felt like it was the time to run. And there is no voice, and there still isn't, about that substance abuse prevention. Treatment obviously is very important to me, but I work in prevention, and we don't usually, look at things from that way of like preventing all these things from happening. And that actually saves us money. It saves us time. It saves us so much. And I really wanted to be that voice at the Capitol. And so that was really the primary reason. And then also that there were no voices like mine. I also got to serve with Jade Barr, who I actually did this presentation a few years ago with. And I think she's going to talk on Wednesday. Her and I were both the urban natives that were represented. She's from Billings, from Great Falls here. And it was just really like a much needed voice to go to that Capitol and speak up for those who haven't always had that voice. And then 2020 came around and I lost my election. If you pay any attention to what happened in Great Falls, it was pretty unprecedented. And then I watched what happened in the session that last year. And I'm like, I can't sit out, because I was like, well, maybe I will run, maybe I won't, because it's a lot of work. But watching all this stuff that went through, I know that Shane fought really hard for everybody. And I just want to say thank you and how appreciative I have of him and everyone in that building who worked tirelessly and probably thanklessly during that session. It was pretty brutal. And I'm like, you know what? This is my home. I'm a whatever generation Montanan. I just can't ignore this. These are things that are happening in my community that people are not paying attention to, or their voices aren't being heard. There was a prevention bill that went through, got to the floor, didn't get passed out because there was some information. Had I been there, I could have stood up and been like, okay, this is what we do. And so that really just propelled me to want to run again. And I think that's really important for anyone to look at, to say, okay, why am I running for office? What is pushing me? Everybody has different reasons. And I was reading some of the comments in here. So many landlords. Yes. So I am a renter, and there are landlords that come into the session and make landlord tenant bills. So it's more favorable to the landlords. Do you, just off the topic, so sorry, Shane, not to put you on the spot, because I can't think of any off the top of my head, because I didn't. But is there any that you know that you worked on or tried to fight or get maybe some tenant rights off the top of your head? Just because someone did bring it up. So.
Well, yeah, I am a landlord.
Well, that doesn't mean you're a bad, like, I mean,
but
my landlord is great.
I did vote
very
against those bills, so because I didn't think they were fair. But I do think we all come from different backgrounds, right? I grew up in rural Montana with a lot of Republicans, and definitely we need people speaking up. But you also, like, what I've learned is, like, the way I work and operate is I can sit down and speak through issues with people, and talk through issues, and what I've noticed the most, especially with some of my colleagues, I'm definitely not going to make this like a political type of thing because we're talking about running for office, but one of the most effective things that I found is just sitting there. I mean, I grew up in a place where people have said some very bigoted, terrible things, and you have to be patient. At least that's how I operate, and work through ways to correct people through education. And of course, some of those folks are just, they're so, they have their heels dug in. It's their way and their perspectives only, right? And you identify those people through the process of who those people are, and really to just be respectful and avoid them for the most part. But there are a lot of good people there, and people that are reasonable that you can work through issues, and educate them and talk through things. And that's just the way I operate. And that's why I think, like, I've been fairly successful on different levels at the legislature, because that's just how I'm wired. It's how I was raised, and that's how I've kind of approached things. But as far as the landlord and landlord tenant laws, we see a lot of those. We'll probably see some more of the next session. And a lot of those have been killed. I actually don't think we saw a ton last session, if I remember right. We saw more 2 sessions ago. And a lot of those particular bills died. But of course, it's more pressing nowadays, especially with the lack of housing, affordable housing, and just homes in the market in Montana, which is a whole nother problem and probably a presentation in its own right, because I sat on local government committee that took up a lot of these issues involving zoning issues. So if that's something that you're excited about, I'd love to have you run and come replace me on that committee, because it's super important. But I have been more involved in, like, the budgeting committee, and I get more excited about the budget and the numbers and side of things nowadays.
Yeah. So up next is the campaign team, and I'll start off with that. So what I did is I have a really good friend that was my campaign manager, and then my cousin is my photographer. And now, actually, this time I'm going to ask her about being my treasurer, because my treasurer moved. And really, it's about, like, especially the first time you run, is getting, like, your close team together. So I use my good friend, my cousin, my mom, and another good friend to help me really build that up. So and really, it's really important to have, like, a manager and a treasurer. And it is nice to have a hobby photographer, because then you can get your pictures taken, and that doesn't cost your campaign anything. And so that's really important, that you get your kitchen table together to make sure that they're helping you if you need something, need to go put out signs or you need to send out thank yous, someone is there to help you do that. And it doesn't necessarily have to be in a official capacity. Mine always has been. It just is easier. 2020 was a lot different though. It was just kind of, we couldn't get together as much. But definitely that first time I ran, we had monthly meetings, and my campaign manager would just check on me as well, and just getting those core people together that you can really rely on, and that will tell you like, hey, don't be doing this, but doing this. What about you, Shane? How did you come together with a campaign team? You're muted.
That might have been more enjoyable for some folks anyway. I came away from my second session lobbying pretty frustrated. Attacks on voting rights, on women's reproductive health, a lot of attacks on people of color, and in different ways, right? I call it kind of these microaggressions through policy, but I came away from that session very frustrated and motivated to run. And I actually sat down with I did what you said, Barb. I sat down with a couple of my friends that are involved in politics. A good friend of mine, Jason Smith, who is the director of Indian Affairs. And I remember telling him, I just looked at him and I said, I'm running for office. And he said, and Jason knows the political, landscape. This is a guy who's worked in politics, worked for Governor Bullock for both terms. He knocked doors, he ran for office. And so he understood the politics of all that. And I just said, I'm running. And he's like, well, did you talk to people locally? Did you go and talk to people, go get coffee with everybody? And I said, I will do that, but it doesn't matter to me because I'm going to do this. And I'm just going to do it. I'm going to put myself out there. And you will be surprised how when you do that, when people see that you're motivated and you're going to put yourself out there and do it, you'll see that the people who are on the fringes, who are like thinking about running, they move aside for you because they see that you are motivated to do it. So if you are just like in that place, I encourage you, and I always say it jokingly, just don't primary me, but I say that jokingly. If primaries are also healthy, right? Like primaries are good. We get good candidates, we get people working hard, we get people out meeting folks and sharing their messages, which is better for our party, or it's better for the state. I shouldn't say our party, but it's better for the state altogether to be talking about how these issues impact us. So that's initially what I did. And I actually did all my own campaign finance work. And because Montana, at least my first 2 campaigns I did, and it's not that hard to do. If you just keep your stuff, you report it, everything's online nowadays. So it's not super difficult to just upload your information, your checks, and your the finance, your money that comes in, and your expenditures as well. So Montana's made it pretty easy to do that. So I wouldn't let that be a deterrent if you're worried about that, because it's pretty user friendly at this point. I would say photos, iPhones take really good photos now. Yeah, having some professional photos for like your literature and stuff is always great, but you don't really need that. I would say websites are really not super important either, but I would recommend getting one just because as a landing spot, because what do people do when they get their mail ballot? The first thing I do is I type in the person's name in Google, right? And I go and research them to find out who they are and what their platform is. So it is important to have that, but at the end of the day, what I think is the most critical part, and I'm probably going to overlap with this in future slide we have, is honestly, you don't need a lot of money. If you're knocking doors in Montana, that's how you win races. I still feel pretty strongly about that in Montana, that's the path to victory. It's the reason why I don't feel like I was as successful as I could have been, even though I polled very well in my last race for statewide office. We weren't able to get on the ground and meet Montanans, which is what people really expect from a lot of us. So if you're motivated, and then that can be kind of overwhelming for people too, going and knocking doors. It was for me. I grew up in a place where I'm very proud. I grew up on the Flathead Reservation. I don't like asking people for money or for help. So getting adjusted to asking people for money can be tough for some folks. You get over that. Going to doors can be tough sometimes when you're knocking doors and talking to people. That can be hard because people will say some really rude things to you. But for every bad door you have, I've always had the conversations, the positive ones I've had are almost always far exceed the bad conversations I have, and the types of people I meet that are really good and kind to me and are supportive of what you believe, really makes you feel good about what you're doing.
Yeah, and I just want to piggyback on the website thing. So I don't actually have one. So I think it can go either way for things. I do have social media that I try to keep updated because sometimes that is, but I think don't let that scare you as well. And I've never also had professional photographers. My cousin is a hobbyist, so we just kind of go out and do it. But that is true now. Phones are much better than they used to be. You're not trying to take it on like a little grainy phone. All right, Shane. So the next thing, how about your support system? What, how did you come up with that? Or did you have a good one? Or kind of tell me a little bit about, and everyone here, about your support system.
Yeah, so I think a support system's good, right? I think, we oftentimes call it, building your cabinet, having people that they have some experience in this work, or have have been involved in the legislative process, worked on campaigns, involved in, an organization that might be familiar with the process. And what I would recommend is you just find, like Barb said, a lot of these things people can do. You have friends that do a lot of this stuff as like hobbies, or nowadays you can make a website for, like, they're just templates. You can go on and pay $50 for one. Photos, if you have a friend who has a decent photo, it can take pictures for you. Someone who might have experience, me and Barb, right? Like, if you decided to run for office, you could say, hey, can I have you in my cabinet? And so I can ask questions about, fundraising. How should I go about fundraising? How do I get access to lists? How do I get access to call lists so I can call people in my district, or call Democrats or people for money? Obviously for me, the support system I always start with is my friend network, my friends and colleagues and people where I feel comfortable asking them for support and money. That's a very good place to start. And then identifying people in different little places to help you with your, whether it's a manager or a treasurer. I did hire a treasurer. I have one now just because in the Senate race, I would like one just because I raise a little bit more money. But, it's nice to have that because you can have that person help take a little bit of that time off of your plate, right? That you can devote to your campaign or just your everyday life that you can't, let that eat up time from. So there's ways to just kind of like refine but I think you start with identifying a group of people to help you kind of build your cabinet and build your team. And then you just check in with them and find ways to where, you identify things that you're struggling with or you're curious about or that you should be refining. And this team can help you build off of that.
Yeah, and I really like what Shane said there is ask, maybe former legislators or current legislators to be part of that support system. Mine was a lot of, so I have horses and someone needed to take care of them and ride them for me as, I was running for office when I couldn't get there. And so my mom was a huge part of that. So she was really part of my campaign team, but she was I called her the caretaker of the horses because someone needed to pick that up for me. So looking at those kind of things, as someone who might be able to help you with childcare, I don't have kids myself, so I can't speak to that from my personal experience, but knowing others that have ran for office, that's something that, finding someone who might be able to help you with that. Also just really relying on other people. You have to. There is no way you can do all of this by yourself. I had an array of people that I would call up And I actually talk about it in the next few slides here, but I would call them and I would just be like, you need someone that you can just cry to. Because I did that. It was like a week before the 2018 election, and I was in Panda Express, and Mafi Funk called me, and she's a representative, and she's like, "How are you doing?" And I just like started crying, because it can be really hard and it can be really stressful. So having that support system, I think, is really, really important, and knowing that you can count on those people when you need them. And I know that Shane, other representatives, other people who've ran for office, whether they won or lose, would be more than willing to share that knowledge with you. We have so much knowledge because there's nothing like finding out while you're going through it. I mean, I can say all this stuff to you. You can take like a week-long workshop on it, but until you've actually done it, there definitely is no substitute for that. So always feel free to contact me for sure.
Well, and the one thing too is like a lot of these questions, they have like a handbook at this Commissioner of Political Practices, and sometimes it's just finding the materials and going through and reading them, because sometimes you'll find that I always just go and look things up. That's just how I'm wired, because sometimes people will say, you know, well, you do it this way. And I'm just like, I want to make sure I get this done right, you know, unless that person really, really went and looked it up themselves. For example, I got a friend called and said, "Hey, I'm right. This person's running for office," and said, "You know, this person gave me too much money. They donated over the limit for my race, and you know, do I have to report that to the COPP and all this stuff?" And it's like, no, you just refund, just send the money back to them, you know, that they're over the limit on, and then your books will be fine, right? So like, but sometimes when you think there's been a big mistake, people just, they get stressed out and overwhelmed by that, and they don't know how to just quickly remedy it. So yeah, just finding someone that can help you kind of troubleshoot things and give them a quick call to help you is a really a good place to start.
Yeah, for sure. And take any trainings that are offered, like this one, obviously. There are trainings across the state for how to run for office. I took the MDLCC one and the Carol's List one when I first ran for office. Shay, did you take any trainings when you were first running? I know that you had already been up there, so you had some legislative experience, but I didn't know if that helped you or if you took some trainings.
Yeah, actually, I took one with the MCV, helped organize
Okay.
Northern Plains, and Ella actually was at that particular one and helped with that. So
Oh, nice.
you know, I think there's, you know, there's different organizations that help. That, you know, you're not going into this, you know, just blind all the time. There's a lot of, and they're always looking for folks to get into these trainings, to make sure that you know, you're doing a good job and you get in there and you can work on becoming a better, you know, not a better legislator, but just helping you navigate the process, I guess.
Yeah, there's a lot to it. And one of the things I'm trying to do in Great Falls is put together a training for like the local candidates here, so we can do like a longer one, or if they need help. So check your central committee if they're going to do anything, or those kind of things are always really helpful. Because like I said, there's so much, and we're going through this pretty fast of what is like 3-day trainings that the very first one I took was MDLCC, and it was a 3-day training. So versus an hour of trying to get through. All right. So now what? Money, is it that important? Shane, I'm going to let you go first with this one. You already kind of touched a little bit on the money. So if you just want to continue with that.
I mean, it's definitely important. You know, I think especially for House races, you know, one of the most important pieces is, you know, I don't think I can say it enough that getting on doors is, if you're motivated and you're willing to go out and knock doors, you don't need a lot of money. I think you can win a race just by doing doors. Of course, having some money to do mailers is important. Having money to, you know, get some photos if you want to get some professional type photos, money for literature, to get access to the programs for voter information. That's a really critical one that you need. So I would say those are, you know, people have different opinions about yard signs in Montana, but I would say that for me, the yard signs are one of the least important things that you can buy, although people see them, and especially in small areas and small towns, they see that and they think, oh, this person must be working, person must be putting themselves out there and knocking doors and getting their signs out, and people must be supporting them, right? So I think if you can do all of it, it's obviously, it's nice and it gives you a better path to victory, but doors are just the most critical. And that's where having someone work on your campaign, depending on what type of race you're in, can be like a manager, can be really helpful, because they can help you organize, how many doors should I be doing, each week, per month, the nights that I'm available. So, you really want to plan, sketch out a schedule to go and hit, a certain amount of doors when you during the week. So when you're available to do so.
Yeah. And just going a little bit more back to the money, it is important. I don't think I would agree with Shane that knocking doors is more important, but you need money to kind of get some literature and such. I also agree with Shane on the signs, but they're kind of a necessary evil. It also depends. I don't know what Missoula is like, but Great Falls loves their signs. So you have to have them here. And I don't know any other place, because I don't know what their local norms are in regards to that. But one of the things that how you start raising money, because I remember one of the questions was, well, I don't know where to begin. And it can be, you're like, oh gosh, I have zero idea. So what I did the very first time, because I think it's hardest. Oh, I see that Butte seems to love signs as well. Yeah, Great Falls loves them. So we just go with it. But one of the very first times that I ran, it can be a little bit harder to raise money that first time, because I didn't come from like really a political background. I hadn't worked in the legislative, I wasn't a lobbyist, nothing like that. So I'm like, oh my goodness, I don't even know where to start. So what I started with is I wrote letters to my close friends and family, like my very closest people, the people who loved me and liked me and who knew me personally. Didn't matter if they're Republican, Democrat, independent, never been political, nothing. Like I just wrote them a letter. I said, hey, I'm decided to run for office. Could you please give me some money? And I actually got a really good response from all sorts of people who had never been involved, people who were on the other side of me, people who agreed with me, etc. And so that's where I really started, was giving people that letter. And then from there, you grow out. Then what's the next one? And Carol's list actually does a really good job with this. It's like the next circle is so maybe like those politically engaged people that so people from your central committee, people that you might work with, those kind of things. And then you kind of go to people who you don't really know, but that they support the same causes you do. And then you just kind of start really small, and then you can go out from there. My least favorite part is asking for money, and it still is. So I'm glad Shane thinks it's gotten easier, but I don't know if it's gotten easier for me. But when you get a name recognition too, when you've ran a few times, it does get easier to raise money, because then people know who you are and have seen what you do. So I know it can be really, really scary. The very first time I ran, I raised $12,000. That's all things that you can look up to see, what has been raised previously in that district. How much did you raise, Shane, the very first time you ran?
I think the
Do you
first
remember?
few house campaigns, I was around 16 or 17,000.
Okay, yeah. And this is something is that in Great Falls, it can be really hard to raise money. It's just the type of town we live in. So I know Missoula can be a little bit easier at times. It's just we have just different political things going on in each town. But yeah, mine was about 12,000. And then the second time I ran, I raised a ton of money, almost 20. But that was, it does get easier as you run more times. Did you find that out too? Shane is like,
yeah,
as you ran, people like, oh, I know that person, I'll give them money because I know what they've done.
Yeah. Well, who's a really good fundraiser and someone that I actually learned a lot from was actually Bryce Bennett. Bryce is someone I talked to quite a bit about fundraising. So yeah, like Ella put a point in there about, talking to people who ran. they can connect you with people or give you pointers. One thing that Bryce would do is he would do a letter, and then he would follow up with the letter he sent to people with a phone call, right? And then I would actually just call. The hardest part I have is like a lot of people I know and I grew up with don't have any money, right? So and there it's foreign to a lot of the folks that I grew up with to have someone in politics ask them for money. A lot of people are supportive of you, but giving you money is some of their own money is a little bit hard for them to do. So but we all have friends and supporters, and I start with them, right? I start with them and ask them for a donation, and it does get easier for me. People I used to ask for $25 or $50. Now I call them and I say, will you give me $400? Or I'll text them because I have a relationship with them, and they prefer a text because they don't want me to call them and give them the whole spiel again. And they'll just, give me, ask me for the Act Blue, and they'll send me the money. So it does get easier in that regard. It has for me.
Yeah.
But once you start asking folks and you start kind of building up your funds and resources, you'll realize that it'll start to add up pretty quick.
Yeah, it really does. I agree. And I have been on the end of Shane's phone call for asking for money. So he's pretty good at it, I'll have to say. So when he was running for state auditor, I did max out to him. So he is, he's pretty persuasive in that way. And let's see, I agree. So the person who ran previously in my position, she gave me her list of donors, and that really helped. So you can kind of call and be like, hey, oh yeah, I've actually, Hannah talks about this. I just turned 35. You can donate 35 for my birthday. I actually do that every year. I say, hey, my 38th birthday is coming up, so I'll be asking for $38. But yeah, I do that, and that actually can bring in some good funds too. So, all right. And we talked about knocking doors, which I agree with Shane. Knocking doors is so important. And I think that was a lot of 2020. I work in public health, so I had made the decision to not knock doors. I don't regret that at all. I still would do everything the same I did. And phone call just is not as effective. So knocking doors is really something that it can be scary, but honestly, when you get into it, and there are some people that are like, okay. But there are so many good people, even if they don't agree with you, just sitting down and talking to them is so beneficial for everybody. And, trying to keep a schedule for yourself. Like, okay, I know when I'm going to do this. Did you keep a schedule, Shane?
I would just plan to go out for a few hours during the week, and then I'd spend the whole weekends going, multiple weekends going out on doors. And one of the talking about money, when you buy literature and you take that picture from whether it's your iPhone 13 Pro or your friend, and you put it on your literature, or even a professional photographer, what is often just as important as people seeing that you have a little note written on your walk card saying, sorry, I missed you. You have your signature, and you leave those on their door, and they see that even if they didn't get to talk to you, they see you're out there working, right? They see that you're, and it's like a friend of mine, and actually even my dad has said this before. It's like, well, you're going to get my vote because I didn't see the other person, right? I've never talked to the other person. So you'll see that that's a pretty way of getting to connect with people. And I found that, a lot of people won't answer doors. I don't know if they thought, I don't want to go into the religion sphere here, but they might have thought I was there for a particular religion, or some other purpose, selling Kirby vacuums or something. I don't know. And sometimes they're there and they won't answer, and that's fine with me. I just leave my literature on their door. And so you'll run into a lot of that too, right? So it's not like every single door you knock, someone's going to answer. And actually you need to knock the door because statistically, most doorbells actually don't work. So, or I think it's like 1 in 3 doorbells don't work or something like that. So you want to knock on the door when you actually go there.
Yeah, I agree. And I really like what Shane said about writing a note. I always wrote a note. I always made it personal to wherever I was going. And I had people tell me, like, if I'd come back to that house and they answered the door that time, they're like, oh, yeah, I remember that you wrote this note about my flower bed. So I tried to always leave a personal note. And I just want to, Zuri said, knocked on doors for the past election. Very few people were rude. And that is true. Like, you don't find too many. And unfortunately, those are things that sometimes get stuck in our head. But
Mhm.
I always try to go back to those really good doors. I have the best, one of the best doors I ever knocked, and I always keep that close to my heart so I can remember that. And then Hannah makes a really good, thank you, Hannah. Do not leave literature in mailboxes. It is not legal. So you don't want to get stuck in any kind of yeah.
Yeah,
I had no idea about the doorbell statistic though. Thank you,
I don't know
Shane.
what the actual statistic is, but it's something like that though. It's
Yeah.
very, there are a lot of doorbells actually don't work. But yeah, I mean, I've had people say, get off my steps. You're not soliciting because you're not there to sell stuff to people. So, I've had people say, get off my steps. You guys are ruining this country. And I will just say, well, if I can't talk to you about what you think needs to change, then I can't go there and represent you and advocate for you, right? And if those sorts of people just, stay grumpy with you, you just be respectful and walk away. And sometimes you'll be surprised if that person actually might vote for you because you were very respectful and they just wanted to vent, right? So you just have to have thick
Yeah.
skin and realize it might happen. Like Zuri just said, a lot of people are not rude. Very few people are. That was my experience, but it might happen, and it likely will happen at some point where you have at least one rude person, and you just have to shrug it off and keep going.
And then my dog started barking. And so it reminded me of something else I do is I bring dog treats, and I always ask the owner if I can give their dog a dog treat. So that's a little, like, just another little trick that I do when I'm on the door. So sorry if you heard my dog. The mailman was here and she was barking at him. So
Well, someone just asked about union print shops. I think there's one
yeah.
in Butte and there's one in Billings, maybe one in Helena, but I don't know if there's one in Helena anymore. But I know for sure Billings and Butte have union print shops. Missoula used to have one. Alpha used to be a union print shop. They're not anymore. So yeah, that does matter to a lot of people, seeing the union bug on the printed materials. And I do try to support the union shops myself.
Me too. Me too. So I know we don't have very much time, so I'm just endorsements. We won't go over that, but 90% of your time is raising money and talking to voters. Like, that's really, you want to be talking to voters. And then Julie asks, can you talk about if donors pressure you policy wise? I've never had that happen in my experience. So Montana isn't like there's not like huge amounts of money people can give you. They did increase it from 180 per person to 400 for this cycle, but I've never had that happen personally. Have you, Shane?
No, I mean, people will tell you what they, want you to support. I've had that, and I've had people, advocate for things, and typically people who are supporting me, for the most part, typically they probably align with me on a lot of issues. So it's usually not weird like that. But no, I haven't had that happen, and I think that's probably, I think that's more of a perception generally of politics, the political world altogether, is that politicians are kind of bought and paid for, right? And that might be, I'm not going to say that doesn't happen, especially at the federal level. But there are definitely more special interest type things there because of the types of donations and the types of money that their individual PACs get thrown from private organizations and big donors and that sort of thing. So but in Montana is just a different world. Like our maxes are different. We're a citizen legislature, so we're there for 90 days, and after the session's up, you go back to work, or you work part-time during the session like I did, right? So and I do want to just say, like, for small races, endorsements can be helpful. You should, I would recommend, if you want to run, identify all of the legislators. If you know people in the community, maybe ask your friends about them to get some kind of insight to who they're connected to, and if they support a different candidate or something of that nature. But go sit down, just tell them your perspectives, and have coffee with them, and just try and make those connections the best way you can, because there's a good chance that you might be working with them whether they're supportive or not. But in smaller elections, I often find that endorsements can be helpful. And I say smaller elections, I mean, the House seats and the Senate seats, not the statewide races, as much as probably those more local races, because people will see, especially on literature, they'll see those donors or those endorsements, and they'll say, oh, this person has a pretty good support network of local folks. But also don't let that deter you, right? Like if someone has an endorsement from somebody, that if you really want to run, run, right? Like it's we need good candidates, like whether it's in Montana or nationally, we need people to run who share the values of or carry the issues forward for the people that expect those issues carried forward for them. And if we have good candidates, like whether it's establishment, people from, the establishment, whatever party it might be, not all the time, those are all great candidates, right? So, we need good candidates, and we need people to step up and not be afraid to run, just because there might be someone who's been a, lifelong blue dog Democrat or whatever they want to call themselves.
Yeah. Thank you for talking about that. We have about 4 minutes left. So Shane, do you want to do any kind of tips and lessons? And then I'll do mine.
Gosh, I feel like my whole talk has been kind of like tips and lessons.
Anything that we didn't talk about then?
Well, I think probably a better use of time, would be to kind of look at some of the questions over here. I think someone asked, how do non-party candidates do in Montana? I mean, there are some libertarian candidates who've successfully ran and won in Montana, but if you look at the makeup of the legislature, it's predominantly Republican and Democrats. So non-party candidates, I think, depending on where you lean and on some issues, probably could do all right in some cases. But Montana, it's proved to be a fairly difficult path forward for non-party candidates in Montana in the past. But that doesn't mean that that's, holds true for everyone, for every person. I think it's really contingent on the individual. Because I know a lot of, people who run as Republicans who are, they're libertarians, right? Or more independent type candidates, but they know they wouldn't win if they ran as one of those. So, or they lean that direction once you get to kind of know them. So, I think, it's just the way the two-party thing is, it's there, but doesn't mean it's, the right process. I do think it's good to have different views and perspectives and candidates from all different backgrounds running for office.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. I do have one more tip that I always have to say. The only thing I ever ask when anyone asks me for advice is take care of your mental health when you are running for office. It is no secret. If you follow me on Twitter, I'm very open about this. I ran myself into the ground in 2018, and it was not good for anybody. And it took me a good almost 2 years to get back to where I'm healthy. And I'm very open with it. But really, please take care of your mental health for yourself, because it can be very detrimental. Then I tried to get over, then the pandemic happened. And so all those other things that probably contributed to mental health, but that is really my biggest takeaway that I tell anybody is, I stopped working out. All I did was work on the campaign and, do my actual job. And, so please take care of your mental health. So that's just my big thing. Shane thought I was gonna go deep with that, but I'm not. Like, it's just really whatever that looks like for you. I do yoga every day. That's what it looks like for me. I don't know what it looks like for anyone else, but that is really my biggest, anytime anyone asks me for anything. And then Elle asked, what kind of flexibility do you feel you have within your party to work? Oh, excuse me. I'm sorry. Oh, I apologize. My goodness, excuse me. To work within your party to work on policy. So I always felt like I never felt like I couldn't work on something that I wanted to work on. A lot of my stuff is prevention. So I would just, no one was like, oh, don't be working on that. So I never felt like, for me personally, in that realm, because that's what I know the most about. But I'm sure, it's not like everyone, even within your own party, feels the same way that you do about things. So, but I don't focus a lot on the other, the treatment side, which of course, like I said before, is very important. But and I always felt like if you had something, you could go to leadership and talk to them. So
Yeah.
I always felt like I had someone to talk to.
I would say the same. I've never had any issues on that front. People are pretty supportive of us, and we have a big tent. I would just leave on saying, don't be afraid to run. Can't say that enough. I believe we need, backgrounds from all, age demographics and backgrounds to really bring a balanced perspective forward. So, if you haven't been in politics for a long time, don't be discouraged by that. Put yourself out there and, take some of these tips that we gave you today to start exploring ways to successfully become a candidate and win a race.
Thank you, Danielle. Thank you for having us. It was great. Here's all of our information. I have Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, as does, I believe, Shane, because I follow him everywhere as well. So I'm pretty sure that you can get a hold of us if you need to. And I know Shane has always answered questions when I had them for him. Sometimes there was a judiciary, though.
Sometimes I'm a little delayed, but I will get back to you eventually. So
Sometimes. Just kidding, Shane. I like Shane. We have a few inside jokes, so it's all good. It's all good.